there's this idea that when you start creating content and start putting yourself out there, that all of the people you love and trust the most from your childhood or who you grew up with had this secret group chat that are talking about how big of a loser you are and how embarrassing this is. And like, but secretly, one, all those people, if they're worth caring about, are super excited for you that you're doing this new and novel thing. And two, a lot of people wish that they were making similar jumps in their career or in their interest.
Dan, thank you for coming on the podcast. Super grateful to have you on. I'm looking at you on Twitter. I see what you're doing. It's inspiring me and it's exciting. And I'm really excited to dive into Create and your story here today.
Yeah, Danny, excited to be here. I've been a longtime listener of the podcast. Admittedly, I've listened to more Danny Miranda podcasts in the last couple of days than I usually do, but have tried to do my research.
So the first place I want to start is with you're projected to have $6 to $8 million in revenue in your first year.
Yeah, I was kind of put on the spot in a podcast and was like, hey, what are you going to do in year one? And I was like, I don't know, $6 to $8 million. A lot has to go well for that to happen. I think it's within the ballpark. I think if we end up at that place, like the business will be in a good place going forward and we can tackle a lot of the initiatives that we want to tackle. 6 to 8, not drawing a line in the sand. If it's below that, I still think it'll be a good year. If it's above it, even better.
Okay, so let's get started with the origin of it.
Yeah.
How does the idea for creatine monohydrate gummies come to be?
Yeah, it was actually about a year ago today, not maybe to the day, but about a year ago, had joined my brother at his media company. And the idea was, hey, Dan, come and join me. Help to Grow. Not Boring is the name of the newsletter, podcast, etc. With the understanding that eventually you'll go off and start your own business. I think at the time, I would not have guessed it that that business was going to be a creatine monohydrate gummy business or really even in health and wellness. It's always been something that I was interested in. And creatine specifically is something that I've been taking for well over 10 years. At the same time, it's not exactly where I saw my mission in life was to kind of evangelize the benefits of creatine supplementation. But when I looked at it, I was like, okay, here's this supplement that I've had a really positive experience with. But anytime I talk to anyone about it, they kind of look at me funnily and are like, dude, why are you taking creatine monohydrate gummy? I don't know if you could see me in the view here. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not a super serious athlete. I'm someone that takes my health and fitness seriously. And so that gap between my lived experience with creatine and the general perception of creatine, I thought presented a good opportunity from kind of a marketing perspective. And then I was in e-commerce the last 5 years and kind of developed a checklist of the types of characteristics of a successful D2C business. And creatine, weirdly enough, checked a lot of those boxes. It's something that you should take every day. It's a natural subscription product. It potentially is high margin. There's a certain subset of customers that are already super passionate about it, but it's also largely underpenetrated. I think like 2% of the general population takes creatine today. General belief thesis here is that like a much higher percentage of the population can benefit from creatine supplementation. So big market, big opportunity, and all the brands in the space, honestly, I didn't think we're doing a great job of reaching non-traditional audiences.
Well, I heard you say in a previous podcast that 2 million people take creatine in the United States daily or weekly. Is that accurate?
I think I usually go 2% of the general population, which
Okay.
would be a little bit higher than 2 million. Maybe it's 2 million adults take creatine on a daily basis. But yeah, it's super under penetrated, and it's largely within the groups of people that you think would be taking creatine. It's people that are super interested in fitness, perhaps already do CrossFit, largely male today. So something interesting about what we're doing is bringing it to populations that traditionally haven't been targeted. And for us, that means 75% female customer base. I think if you looked at a traditional creatine product, it would be closer to like 95% male, 5% female. Don't have hard facts on that, but that's part of what we're doing.
The wild part is a lot of people don't even know what creatine is or
Yeah.
why they should be taking it. So what is creatine and why should someone be taking it?
Yeah, so tons of science behind creatine. I think what you need to know about creatine is that it's naturally produced by the body and you get it in any meat-based diet. So if you're eating meat, you're already consuming 1 to 2 grams of creatine a day. Essentially, what it does is help facilitate the production of ATP. ATP is the energy currency of the cells. If you're taking creatine, the benefits you're going to see, which I think is probably what you're most interested in, are increased strength, increased muscle mass, better muscle recovery. There's also a growing body of research around creatine and cognitive benefits. That's kind of like the call option here. Honestly, the research is relatively scant at this point, but the research that has come out is super promising on creatine's benefits for everything from memory to intelligence to post traumatic brain injury. So that's the call option. I think right now we're focusing on the core benefits of bigger muscle, stronger, better recovery, better performance during high intensity interval training. But there's also this really promising research on what it can do for mental health and brain health.
Okay, so what's interesting about your company to me is that it's doing so many things that you wouldn't expect from a creatine company. Like the fact that one, it's a creatine company.
Yeah.
Name another creatine company in the world. There's not any that you could think of. Another is like when you think of creatine, obviously it's a male bodybuilding centric supplement that people
Yeah.
take. But what women are saying that they should take creatine? I actually remember my cousin talking to my cousin-in-law she's a woman, and she's saying to him, this is steroids. What are you taking creatine for? Like that's a bad thing. And I can imagine her in 5 years marketed properly. She's a 30-year-old lawyer. And I can imagine her being like, oh, I want to take creatine in 5 years. So how do you market to a 35 or 30-year-old woman to effectively get them to change their mind?
Yeah, so it's not going to be just us. I think a lot of the legwork is actually being done by other people in the general health and wellness space. The focus on strength training and connecting it to longevity, we're not doing a lot of that marketing. That's happening by folks like Huberman and Atia and Ferris. And it turns out creatine is one of the most effective supplements for strength training.
Mm.
So there's these macroeconomic trends that not economic, these macro trends around the benefits of creatine that I think we are going to fade off of over the next couple of years. I think, generally the benefits are broadly desirable, whether you're a 35-year-old female lawyer in New York City or whether you're a 65-year-old man in the middle of the country. It helps increase strength. It helps build muscle. For older populations, it slows down sarcopenia. There's these broadly, I would say, desirable benefits that just have not been effectively communicated by the supplement industry to date. And if they have, they've been very targeted towards one specific population, that is the male bodybuilder or super serious athlete population.
Yeah, it makes sense. Talk to me about how you expected to market this product
Yeah.
versus how it actually has been marketed in the past year.
Yeah. So it's been super bottoms up. We found that female fitness influencers are much more open to creating content than basically any other population out there. And because they're more open to creating content, that's what we run Facebook ads on. And because those Facebook ads feature female fitness creators, it attracts female customers and the flywheel goes on and on. That's our wedge customer. I think if we're successful over time, it'll kind of go beyond just female fitness enthusiasts and into these populations that haven't historically been targeted. But generally, female fitness enthusiasts, I would say, are open to the idea of creatine supplementation. They're open to just supplementation in general, but they're not targeted. So it's like a great first customer, but over time, we think really anyone, save a few kind of at-risk populations, can benefit from creatine.
I love that. So I want to talk to you about you
Yeah.
and what got you into doing this in the first place. Were you always entrepreneurially minded? And when did you know, oh, at some point in the future, I'm going to start my own company?
Yeah, I would say no. I was not the kid that was starting the lemonade stand. I wasn't flipping baseball cards. I was not an entrepreneur. But funnily enough, it turns out now that I'm, I guess, 28 years old and my siblings are older and all of that, we've had the luck of time to see how this has all played out. Everyone in my family is an entrepreneur. My parents run two small businesses. My brother has his newsletter. My sister's the actually only tech entrepreneur in the family. So it runs in my blood, but I would say none of us were overly entrepreneurial when we were younger. But we had our parents to look up to in terms of like, this is possible. You can go out and work for yourself, provide a really nice life for your family. And so I think that's been an inspiration from the early beginnings, despite potentially not having that like grindy entrepreneurial self improvement mindset from day one. I think, I've been working in e-commerce for the last 5 or 6 years, and from that experience learned there are a ton of hard things about starting a business, but anyone can do it. There's nothing, uniquely special about at least the entrepreneurs that I was interacting with, other than, they were willing to take the leap of faith initially and then follow up every single day thereafter. And that has been my experience in starting this, is like, I'm not doing anything special. Like, I'm not smart by any means. I'm not, anything special, other than I'm willing to get up each and every day and like push the business an inch or two forward. So yeah, I don't know if I have it in my DNA, other than to say everyone in my family has turned out to be an entrepreneur. So there must be something.
What was it like to work with Packy on Not Boring for so long?
Yeah, I would say Packy is one of the few people, maybe not few people, but he is actually as nice as he purports to be online. Like, I think his thing on the internet or on Twitter is that he's just like a really good dude, a really nice dude.
Yeah.
And that is Packy. He's been kind of a gregarious, popular, kind dude for as long as I've known him, which is 28 years. I think he's like 36. He's 8 years older than me.
He's
So
36?
yeah.
Wow.
So he's almost like he's my brother and my best friend, but he's also like almost an uncle figure at this point, because he's that much older and has been through a lot of the cycles that I'm going through now, back in like the early aughts, or not early aughts, the 2010s. So, he's someone I've considered my role model and best friend for my entire life, and getting to work with him has been awesome in the sense that we're kind of interested in all of the same things. And like, my dad says it like we speak in a shorthand that almost no one else would understand, because we consume the same information, we care about the same things, we have a very similar worldview. And I would say the one thing about Packy is he grinds harder than anyone I've ever met. Like, he's writing, he's 2 years into this, and I know you're about 2 years into this as well. He's still writing for like 60 hours a week to put out an essay on, I think he wrote about last week, like crypto use cases. And he's 2 years into this, and he's still like basically grinding late into the night, writing essays every night for his audience. And so that's super, like, he's had success. He's kind of gone to the top of the newsletter game, but he's still hungry each and every day to put out good content. And that's something I look up to.
Well, I remember interviewing him for episode 88 of this podcast.
Oh yeah.
And you're, I think, 344.
Yeah.
If that's right. So
260 episodes behind him or so.
exactly. So, I mean, listen, it's interesting to have you both on, especially because he mentioned early on about how he would send his brother, unbeknownst to me who that was,
Yeah.
the early editions of the drafts of Not Boring, and his brother was the editor and would give him straight constructive feedback on what was actually good and what wasn't.
Yeah.
That was you, right? He doesn't have another brother.
No, I'm the only brother. We do have a sister. Yeah, but for about the first 2 years of Not Boring, I was just doing it basically Sunday nights. He'd send me an edit, or he'd send me an essay. I'd send him back edits within an hour or two. And that was just something I was like very just happy to be involved with him, basically following his passion. And again, we go back to being like interested in the same topics. I'm of the very small percentage of the population that's like down to nerd out on the types of stuff that he likes to nerd out about and write about. And so for the first 2 years, it was a non-professional relationship. About a year ago, I did come on full time, and thank you, Packy. You've been compensating me for my labor for the last year or so. But yeah, I mean, it's I think in terms of like taking it back to why I did that and kind of his success, he'd be doing this stuff anyway, even if he wasn't getting paid. I was editing his essays because despite the fact I wasn't getting paid, because one, I'm interested in what he's writing about, and two, it's just really exciting to put content out into the world and get feedback, and to play a small role in that was really exciting for me at the time. So yeah, it's been a wild ride the last 2 years or so with him.
Not Boring's up to what? How many subscribers?
We're approaching 200,000 on the newsletter.
Wow. So when you were editing this newsletter, and do you still edit it at all?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
still do?
Still edit it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I write our Friday newsletter, which is called the Weekly Dose of Optimism, and then I edit his Monday newsletter.
So you're pressing or you're responsible in some part for over 100,000 people seeing some of your writing and some of his writing. That's a crazy responsibility. And particularly in the editing part of it, what are you looking for when you're receiving a piece of his writing to make it even better?
Yeah, so I it sounds like you probably read Packy's work, and maybe if you're listening to this, you may have also or you're more likely to have read a Not Boring Essay if you're listening to the Danny Miranda podcast. He's super long-winded. The dude has a lot to say, and I think he's a very smart writer, and sometimes he can get over his skis with that because he has a lot to say and he wants to say it in a smart way. But basically, without fail, I'm saying, hey, Packy, state what you're trying to say up front, and then we can get into explaining it and all the cutesy little things that you do with
Mm,
your writing. But if for someone to be engaged in this 10,000 word essay, they have to know within the first minute what you're writing about.
mm.
That's the most common piece of feedback that I'm giving him late on Sunday nights. And like it happens when I was first starting this Sunday nights, I'd like, coming off a long weekend, Packy sending me like a 10,000 word essay. I'm like, dude, you're not paying me to do this. I'm like potentially like a little hungover from a long weekend. So I'm just giving him very true feedback about like, this is dumb. You're not saying this in the right way. Like, get over yourself. This is like, so I think that's what kind of set me apart from another editor he could have had is that just very straight feedback to him. Now ChatGPT is out. He put out a tweet the other week. He's like, ChatGPT is a great editor, which was kind of a shot across the bow at me. So I gotta up my game on the editing front going forward.
And then you said that the plan always was for you to start your own thing.
Yeah.
You basically got an MBA by being an editor for this newsletter because it is read by some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs in the world, and you're the one who's looking at it first.
Yeah.
So, what have you learned from Not Boring that you've applied to create?
Yeah, so I think, aside from a lot of the strategy and insights that he's writing about, that's just has helped me operate the business. One of those things being the hard things about easy things, which is his basically seminal essay on e-commerce. I think generally what I've learned most from Packy is that put out good content into the world, put out quality content, and good stuff will come back from you. So I've been building Create in public basically from the start, and I'm doing that because I saw my older brother build his thing in public and
Mm.
frankly save a few cancellations from Zach Weinberg on crypto Twitter. It's all been largely good. So I feel like that gave me the confidence to go out and kind of like do what I was doing in public.
Mm.
That's been the main learning. Yeah, so I think the one was the building in public, and then two, he's just a good operator online. Like he's not clapping back at anyone. He's not overly defensive of his ideas. He's not canceling people. He's not dunking on people.
Mm.
And so just being kind of a good citizen, a good online citizen, again has paid him back in spades. So I try to replicate that as well.
Yeah, I see that with what you're doing on Twitter. What has building in public given you, and why do you continue to do that?
Yeah, so one, just being totally transparent, it gives you something to talk about, right? Like it's content that people are interested in consuming. And so I always have something to talk about if I'm willing to talk about and share numbers on my business. The second is just the feedback that you're getting from the online community,
Mhm.
right? I can by putting out content in the world, anytime I have a question, basically about how I can best run my business or how I should think about something, there's usually generally one to two thoughtful responses that I'm able to get back. So you put out good information in the world, you're going to get good information back, I think. And being willing to share opens you up to just more kind of possibilities and more people sharing their thoughts with you in an unfiltered way.
What have you found to be some of the most creative ways that people have used the product in ways that you couldn't think of, or in ways that are interesting that could be potentially helpful for somebody who's an e-commerce owner themselves?
Yeah. So we send a lot of product to people. And that's one thing I think like don't be cheap about when you start an e-commerce brand. Send your product to as many people as possible if you can afford to do it, because you're gonna get good content back, you're gonna get good feedback, you're gonna see trends that you can kind of triple down on in a non-organic way. For us, people love tossing gummies in their mouth. So like, I don't know, think like golden fish, like they do that with our creatine gummies, and we get a ton of good content about that. And so I don't know if that's generally applicable to other brands, but the overarching theme is like get your product out into the world, have something that people can create fun content around, and then figure out what they're doing and figure out incentives to have more people do that. So that's worked well for us.
In terms of the name of the brand itself, how much time did you spend on it? And do you think a name is important?
I think a name's important. Yeah. This is gonna sound weird, but it's one of those things where like I kind of just woke up from a dream, not like it's some high and mighty insight I had, but I did wake up from a dream and I was like, yeah, it would make sense if I called my creatine brand Create. So yeah, that's where the name came from. And I think it evokes a bunch of different things. Like obviously there's the word association of create and creatine, it makes sense. But it's also about, you know, you take creatine, you are building muscle, you're taking action, you're increasing your energy. It just plays well with the name. So I think the name is important. I think you can have a great business with a shitty name.
Mm.
Like it's by no means a non-starter, but having a fun name is definitely or a good name is definitely not a downside. There's no downside to it.
How long did that take for you to come up with that?
Dude, I think it was in the first couple of days. It was one of those things where, like, the company almost followed the name too, where I was like, "I wanna start a modern creatine brand. What's a good name for that? Create." I didn't have any other working titles. It was just kind of one of those things that snapped immediately. Don't know where it came from other than create sounds a lot like creatine.
I love that.
Yeah.
When you think about the people who inspire you the most, I know Mark Zuckerberg is somebody who
Yeah,
who comes to mind and someone you defend a lot. And I'm with you on this. I talked to
yeah,
Nick Majuli about this as well, how Mark Zuckerberg doesn't get the credit that he deserves.
yeah.
Why is Meta a brand that you admire and respect? And why is Mark Zuckerberg somebody who you admire as well?
So I think Meta, admire and respect. It's one of the largest businesses ever created, and whether you admire them, you have to at least respect that, right? Like it is at one point was the most valuable company in the world. It was the fastest to, I believe, $1 trillion market cap ever, beat out Google by a couple of years. And so, again, if you don't admire them, you still have to respect that.
Mm.
In terms of admiration, I think it's the greatest entrepreneurship enabler of all time.
Mm.
I put it to kind of picks and shovels. Picks and shovels are great, but a map telling you exactly where the gold is located is even better. And for a lot of small businesses, that's exactly what Meta is. It's customer discovery, right? It's revenue discovery. Google is great at capturing demand. Facebook Meta helps you go out and actually create and discover that demand.
Mm.
That's not really something, at least at the scale and efficiency that Meta is doing it, that has ever been around in the business world. So that's why I love Meta. It helps entrepreneurs like myself create businesses that they otherwise couldn't create if this channel didn't exist at the level of efficiency that it currently does. Zuck, I like to again am a Zuck apologist, but I don't even think it's an apologist. I like to liken him to like a LeBron James. I think I've made that comparison before where this guy has been in the limelight for the majority of his adult life. And when you take a step back, obviously Meta has been accused and of some pretty questionable activities, and there's things around data privacy and all of that. And we should hold those companies to the highest level of scrutiny. They're very important. Zuck personally has been married to the same woman his entire life, has a family that he seems to put front and center in everything that he does, runs a top 10 organization in the world, takes his health and wellness really seriously, is very professional in everything that he does. I think like I liken him to LeBron in the sense he's been in the limelight for his entire career, and there's very few questionable, personable things that you can point to and say, hey, despite Zuck being the richest, call it a 30-year-old at the time in the world, he actually kind of acted like an adult. The shittiest thing that Zuck's ever been accused of is putting like CEO bitch on his business card when he was like 19 years old.
Hmm.
If you could say that about other world leaders that are handed, and not maybe handed isn't the right verb, but who step into a situation by the time they're 30, they're the richest person in the world, they're potentially the most powerful person in media in the world, And that's the biggest accusation or personal flaw that you can levy against him. I would say they've done a pretty good job of handling the responsibility. And I feel like that's something that he doesn't get a ton of credit for beyond just, yeah, creating a company that helps millions of smaller companies operate more efficiently, which is pretty important for the economy at large.
Yeah, I love that comparison to LeBron James. I never thought about it like that, but really is so true. When you think about how you used Meta and how to use Meta most effectively,
Yeah.
what comes to mind and how has advertising on the platform, how can an entrepreneur do that to blow up and build
Yeah.
their business?
Yeah, I would say with marketing in general, things change so quickly. I'm by no means a Meta expert. I would say what I do know about Meta is that one, things change, and two, you're never going to outsmart Meta,
Mm,
and that's gotten increasingly true over time. Where back in the day, you do super targeted audience development. You'd set lookalike audiences. You'd say, hey, I have a product that I think would work really well with 18 to 45-year-old women in El Paso, Texas that are interested in creatine gummies, for example. And you'd go through and you'd select all those variants, and that would serve those ads to those people effectively. That hasn't been true about Meta for the last couple of years, and it's increasingly getting less and less true. Now it's essentially a game of creative
mm,
and not media buying. You're not doing the audience targeting. You're essentially saying, here's really good creative. Meta's AI systems go out and find the customers that you think are most likely to engage with this creative or to make a purchase from this creative.
mm.
And I think that's just generally true about AI, where like we're not going to fully understand how everything works, but understanding that helps you interact with those systems even better.
Mm. How are you using AI and more specifically ChatGPT to help your brand grow?
Yeah, I'm writing a lot of emails with Meta, and I'm being open, or with, sorry, I'm writing a lot of emails with ChatGPT. And I'm also being open about the fact that I'm writing a lot of emails to ChatGPT. I'll tell people, hey, here are the 5 benefits of creatine supplementation according to ChatGPT, because they're just as smart of this as I am. They have the wisdom of the crowd, essentially, and so let's see what they have to say. I think people generally are super interested about ChatGPT, even outside of tech right now. You're a general consumer,
Mm.
so if you could be like, "Hey, I'm selling creatine gummies." But I'm selling creatine gummies along with ChatGPT. That's not something you expect whatsoever from a company trying to sell you a supplement. And so I think it adds another level of kind of interest for the consumer. The other thing I'll say, going back to not boring, it is just like a really good editor, right? So I don't think any ChatGPT system is going to be producing Packy level 10,000 word essays on kind of novel concepts, but it could be replacing me as an editor in the next couple of years in terms of, hey, dude, your structure is off X, Y, and Z here.
Mm.
Here's where it could get tighter. Here's basically an intro paragraph to this essay that would make everything that you're saying, the preceding or subsequent 10,000 words, really digestible in just 5 sentences.
Mm.
So that's how I'm kind of using it across the board. There's a tons of things you can do around content creation with ChatGPT or OpenAI, just on SEO. So I'm pumping out blog posts about anything SEO related to creatine on a daily basis. I'm not writing those essays. No human is writing those essays. ChatGPT is writing it, and it's helping us rank on the first page of Google for a lot of those keywords within like 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
So I think those kind of content creation use cases are where I'm using it in a meaningful way at this point. I think the interesting thing about ChatGPT is like you can't actually predict what you're gonna be using this for down the line.
Mm.
You can't predict all the use cases of something like ChatGPT or generally a new technology like that. But I think the early signs of the technology is that it will be really useful in a bunch of different ways. And for us, it's actually been pretty tangible, like right off the bat.
I love that. Thank you for expanding on that. I'm so curious about like, let's say somebody is a year ago where you were.
Yeah.
What are the first steps they should take after they've created their brand, after they, let's say, have a product? Where should they go and what should they do in the next month to make it the most effective? And what do you wish you knew so that you could have been at where you're at a little bit faster?
Yeah. I would start to build a community online around whatever it is that you're selling. So I was talking about the benefits of creatine supplementation for 6 months before I ever started selling a product on Twitter.
Mm.
And that was not an audience I developed prior to starting this company. My followers on Twitter, which I don't have that many follow me, uh, was mostly around tech and business strategy, a little bit of e-commerce. And then I started randomly tweeting about like creatine supplementation. And I think it threw off some of my initial followers, but there was a higher percentage than I would have guessed of people that, followed me for tech, but were also interested as to what I had to say about health and wellness more broadly. And so, um, putting out content around that on Twitter, getting other like-minded people that may be interested in whatever you're about to start kind of on your side prior to actually starting that thing is super helpful. So when you do launch, you have these like, call it 50 to 100 people that are rooting for your success. Um, I felt like I'd already kind of accomplished a little bit of something before I even sold a first product because these people on Twitter were engaging with me on a topic that previously they never would have engaged with me on. Um, and so, yeah, that would be my advice. Just start talking about whatever it is that you're doing in a public forum. And I mentioned this earlier, but good stuff is likely to come back to you.
Yeah, it's interesting because if I think about when you started talking about it versus when I actually got the product, I think
Yeah,
it was around 6 months.
yeah,
And it was because it takes people a minute to recognize you in their head as that type of person.
yeah.
So it's just an interesting thing to think about. What people see you as today is going to be the person that you decided you were 3 months ago, usually.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Um, and I think people change over time more. I know, at least publicly online, my persona has changed a bunch, and professionally, my persona has changed a bunch. We haven't talked about this prior to Not Boring, prior to Create. I was like the head of finance or like de facto CFO at a women's underwear company, right? So, like, my personality, my public image has changed a lot in just literally the last year. And it all seems authentic to me. Like, I was super interested in that. Now I'm super interested in this, but my areas of interest and what people associate with me has definitely changed a lot in the last year.
What was that like? Being the CFO of a women's underwear company?
Yeah, so, just so I don't, get a lawsuit, it was head of finance technically, the top financial officer. Um, no, I mean, I think, one, it provided a lot of fodder for my friends and my dad to, for jokes for the rest of their life that I was the head of finance at a women's underwear company. But two, I think it was a lot of good learning experiences around putting yourself out there and like not necessarily being embarrassed by
Mm.
something if you're interested in that thing. Like I was interested in that company from a business perspective, and that curiosity from a business perspective propelled me far enough to put up with a lot of the embarrassment of posting on LinkedIn for the first time that, hey, I'm leaving my job to go join an early stage women's underwear company. People that, interact with me a few times a year, that's like the one or two things that they're going to associate with me going forward. So I think if you're able to kind of take that leap of faith, swallow a little bit of pride in order to chase whatever's piquing your curiosity at the time. Um, like ultimately, is if you're chasing that curiosity, it's going to play out well for you. If you're doing it for engagement bait, or if you're doing it to like for some non-authentic reason, I think it's probably not great. But yeah, it was like chase your curiosity, be willing to swallow your pride, and be a little bit embarrassed, and like probably good stuff will happen to you.
Why was that interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just it was an e-commerce business. It had gained a lot of traction earlier, and I kind of viewed it as like a almost a business case study of like, yes, we're selling women's underwear, but I'm going to view this as uh we're selling widgets, right? And what's like the best way to grow this widget company as a 25-year-old head of finance? Um, and I'd been at a company previously where I was like a relatively low man on the totem pole. I was making an illegal amount of money in New York when I first moved here, working for an e-commerce company, like literally below what you're allowed to be paid for like the first 2 years I was working at an e-commerce company in New York, and had moved myself up through that company. And then by the time I was 25 years old, I was either gonna like continue to climb that ladder or go work at a women's underwear company. So I was like, all right, there's two options here. can either continue this slog or take a little bit of embarrassment and go work at this women's underwear company. Um, and so I don't know if that answered your question, but
It embarrassing to who? Like that's all it's like
yeah,
it's all in your own head
that's
usually.
a good question, right? Because like I think Packy talks about this too when he first started Not Boring, that there's this idea that when you start creating content and start putting yourself out there, that all of the people you love and trust the most from your childhood or who you grew up with had this secret group chat that are talking about how big of a loser you are and how embarrassing this is. And like, but secretly, one, all those people, if they're worth caring about, are super excited for you that you're doing this new and novel thing. And two, a lot of people wish that they were making similar jumps in their career or in their interests. And like, for you to be almost their curiosity outlet or like adventurous outlet, they look up to that a lot. So I think it's just getting over the fact and uh, coming to the um, acknowledgement that like that group chat doesn't exist. Your friends actually aren't making fun of you behind your back for doing X, Y, and Z thing. Um, I feel like that's kind of the biggest leap that a lot of people have to make, is that like people are generally more supportive than you give them credit for the weird stuff that you're trying to take on.
Yeah, and for me, I remember the biggest people that I was trying to impress, or the people whose opinions I was valuing, were people that I didn't care about in high school.
Right?
And I'm like, what is going on here? When I recognized that, I was able to set it free. I was able to be like, oh, I actually don't care about what this person thinks. But in my mind, I'm still trying. I think it's something to do with like your brain developing around that time. And those are the relationships or social scenarios that you care about. And so you're there for everything you do, you optimize for that in some small way, but you can release that. How do you release that?
I think just taking hits on the chin, right? Like there are times where you do embarrassing stuff, and like even if the worst case scenario of someone calling your name or making fun of you for doing that happens, you still like get up the next day and do it. Like nothing bad that happened, nothing that bad happens,
Yeah.
even in the worst case scenario of embarrassment. Um, so yeah, I think it's really just getting over that. You're right, that initial brain development when you're like 17 years old and figuring out how social interaction works. Um, Getting past that, I think just opens up like a whole kind of array of opportunities.
What's the most embarrassing thing that happened to you that you had to uncover or get past? I'll tell you mine.
Yeah,
In my own, when I was in high school, a kid pushed me into a locker.
yeah,
I was 140 pounds soaking wet, and this 200-pound, 6'3" kid pushes me into a locker. And for 8 years, this is in the back of my head. I
yeah,
never recognized that or understood it. But then I was sitting in a meditation and it popped up, and I was like, yo, that's been in my head for 8 years.
yeah.
And that's the reason why I started lifting weights. And when I overcame that, it allowed so much peace in my own life of like, wow, like that's all good. Like that kid pushed me into a locker. I forgive him. I forgive myself for holding on to it. And I'm ready to do the next thing in my life. And the podcast started shortly after that.
There you go.
So it was very impactful. But I'm curious for you, what's the most embarrassing thing you had to get over?
Yeah, I got sent home from a school trip in high school, that was, like, very public,
Mm.
and, for in my mind, I was like, "Oh, because I got sent home from a school trip." I'll be honest, I bought alcohol with a group of friends on a high school trip, and, like, we all got sent home, and big deal in our community at the time, and, like, felt like I had a scarlet letter on my chest of, like, "I am now a bad kid because X, Y, and Z."
Mm.
And so getting over that initial public embarrassment of like, hey, Dan's now the troublemaker because he did the thing that, everyone in the history of the school trip had ever done, but he got caught for it.
When you when you think about the situations that have shaped you,
Yeah.
what are the few situations that help explain who you are today,
Yeah.
that have made you into the person you are?
Yeah. I think going back to being the youngest kid of older, kind of successful, at least from the outside siblings, has shaped me and driven me to want to go out and create my own path. Um, I also grew up kind of, and this is not an experience unique to me. I would say it's unique to a lot of younger siblings, where my siblings had already left the house. They were adults. So my parents always treated me like an adult for the 8 years or 6 years rather I was living with them in the house, and
Mm.
always being treated like an adult hopefully makes you act like one a little bit earlier than you otherwise would. So I think that's one thing. And I think it all does come back to family. So I'm gonna another example there. Um, and I think the other thing of just again, uh, each member of my family, and no one in my family has had a massive or even um, great financial outcome from their entrepreneurial endeavors. Like Packy's probably the top, and he writes a newsletter. He's not like getting super rich here, but there's just this underlying curiosity where my mom is getting up at like four. She's 65 years old and still getting up at like 4 a.m. to do her consulting work because like she's generously curious about the type of work that she's doing and is a little bit obsessed with work. My dad's the same way where like after dinner, he'll go and like wrestle with an Excel spreadsheet. And he's like a 67-year-old dude. And it's like there's something in us. And Packy is, skipping family events to go kind of like twiddle his thumbs and try to write an essay for his audience. And then like my sister lives in Ghana. Like she's been separate from our family for basically the last 15 years because she wants to like increase economic opportunity in Ghana via her startup. And so I feel like I won't be able to directly tie it other than to say we're like weirdly obsessed with whatever it is that we're working on at any point in time. And that also definitely has its negative side effects too. Like,
Mhm.
doesn't make us always the most pleasant people to be around or living with, etc. But it definitely shapes kind of who we are uh, and the type of work that we like to take on.
Well, it sounds like your sister's the last McCormick that I need to
Oh,
tackle because
Megan's the more interesting of all the siblings. She lives in Accra, Ghana. She has a tech startup there. She runs on the side the largest NGO in West Africa. Yeah, Megan McCormick. Oze is her company. So
wow,
yeah,
cool. Well, when she's in New York or Austin, I'll have to
yeah,
check
yeah,
her out. Okay, so Packy also brought up family and brought up that he was raised incredibly well and that he credits a lot of his success to his parents. And I'm
yeah.
curious to dive into that. If you believe the same thing and also like what your family did differently, because parenting is something I'm so fascinated by. And I think that more people and more conversations need to be centered around here.
Yeah. Well, first off, like unconditional love. We're so like anyone that is able to get unconditional love from their parents is already getting a head start in life, and that is a privilege that all of us were lucky enough to have. I would say beyond that, very important factor is they always put education and I would say like being smart was always important. Packy, Megan, or I were never IQ the smartest, but we were always the folks that were taking on kind of like blending in classroom intelligence with extracurriculars and kind of well-roundedness. And my parents always rewarded that um, and always made it seem cool,
Were
right?
there any stories in particular that stand out to help showcase that truth?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like one example here is that um, uh,
Think back to specific grades.
yeah.
Think back 11th grade, 8th grade, 6th grade, like actual teachers. That could be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that, like, kinda stands out is, um, my dad, like, gifted us Excel for Dummies at, like, such a young age,
Mm,
and we weren't mathematicians, none of us are that good at Excel today, but he tried to instill, like, that kind of thinking into us at a very young age, and it was things like that where, the kitchen table, my mom did a great job, of making sure that dinner was on the table, like, 3 to 4 nights a week we'd be eating as a family, um, and business was always just kinda, like, the main topic of what we were talking about. Like, my dad's business, like, I know the name of, like, every guy my dad has ever worked with, and like what he thought about that person because it was just front and center. It was like it was what we talked about at our table. I know the intricacies of my mom's business because, she would have meetings in the kitchen while raising me. So I think just kind of infusing our day-to-day lives with that level of curiosity and that focus on creating value. I don't even want to call it business because, like, again, none of them made a ton of money from what they're doing, but just like running businesses, I think was infused in the everyday activities that we're doing, and that manifests now in like all three of their kids starting businesses.
What advice would you have for people who don't have that as their family structure or conversation in their day-to-day lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can have those conversations with your family, or you can have them with people you're not directly blood related to. I was lucky in the sense that the people that I was surrounded with growing up tend to have the same interests that I do. Turns out, if you have any interest, there's likely at least 1,000 people out there in the world that also share that interest with you.
Mm.
Go out and seek people that are willing to have genuine conversations with you on the topics that you're most interested in, um, and just be like a good player in whatever ecosystem you decide to enter.
What advice do you have for people who are lost? And they're lost in the sense of they know they can do more. Have you ever felt that yourself?
For sure.
What moment or what time in your life epitomizes you feeling lost the most?
Yeah. I would say a good rule of thumb is get more into fitness if you can. Like it sounds blunt force, but getting a strong fitness routine solves a lot of life's issues. It
Mm.
doesn't solve everything, but it's like it's an easy win every day, and getting an easy win helps you tackle some of life's more like complex challenges. So if you're feeling lost, start some kind of fitness routine. You don't need to be a bodybuilder. You don't need to be a serious athlete, but just getting to the gym or going for a run or practicing yoga, doing something physically challenging consistently, I think solves a lot of life's issues, or at least gets you on solid footing such that you can tackle a lot of those issues. For me, like, I think COVID, I was probably, like, 25 years old when it first
Mm.
happened, moved home, didn't exactly love what I was doing, had, like, gotten out of a relationship, and that's what I did. I got super into fitness, almost to, like, a disgusting level, probably for, like, 6 to 8 months, um, because I felt lonely. I felt like I didn't have a meaningful relationship with anyone outside of my family at the time. I was disconnected both physically and kinda socially from the world, and so, yeah, fitness kinda changed my life. I'm no longer on an extreme fitness regimen. There's a time where I was, and it was super helpful, but I think just even just a more muted or common sense fitness regimen can help people rediscover some sense of purpose or at least not feel lost.
Mm. What's at the heart of your ambition?
I mean, I think it's some kind of going back to family again. Like I don't want to make the whole thing about family, but I do feel some um, deep seated urge to do something that makes my parents proud. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a healthy ambition, but I think like if I was being honest with myself, a lot of what I do is such that I can like tell my mom and dad like, "Hey, look what I accomplished." And what I tell my mom is like she's wanted a pool forever. I want to build a business such that I can say, "Hey mom, here's a pool by your 70th birthday." Like that's very artificial and but like there's something more deep seated underneath it where like I'm truly working to make them proud.
Have you asked your parents what would make you proud?
Um No, I don't know if I'm that introspective with them. I wish I was. I think I have a good I think what I think would make them proud, just knowing them, is probably actually different than what would actually make them proud, right? Like, I'm sure my mom would love the pool, and mom, I'll get you the pool. But I think like seeing me happy in a solid relationship, being a good member of our family, being a good member of the communities that I choose to operate in, would make her just as proud as like building a big creatine gummy business. But I also think, like, to some extent, they do value all of the little things that it takes to build a business like that, they would be proud of those things, not necessarily any kind of outcome of it. Just like the fact that I was willing to take the risks, willing to put in the hard work, not necessarily that like hopefully one day it makes us money.
Yeah. What's on the horizon for Create, and how do we get to the $6 to $8 million number that we spoke about in the beginning?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of keep on keeping on, doubling down on what works. I think when we look at it like a lot of other brands, they've been able to lend credibility from other people with audiences, people like Danny Miranda out there that care about these topics. Like if you look at the top podcasters in the world, they all kind of have a health and wellness bent.
Mm.
Whether it's Joe Rogan, he's been talking about health and wellness for the last 15 years. Andrew Huberman, who's the number 2 podcast in the world. Tim Ferriss wrote The 4 Hour Body. Like, it turns out people care a lot about health and wellness. So I think kind of associating with people like that have these audiences that can lend a little bit of credibility to what we're doing is where like Create will go from where it is today to kind of a household name. We're not there yet. We don't have partnerships with any of those people, but hopefully over time we'll get to work with folks like that.
I love that. I've never thought about that as well with top podcasters having a bent towards health and wellness. But on that topic, what do you think most people are doing wrong, generally speaking, in terms of their own health and feeling good in their own body?
I think one thing that I struggle with my own health, both like I think it's physical, but it's more mental, is I'm just on my phone way too much.
Mm.
I've said in the past I'm not good at anything other than being able to carry on like 17 different conversations across 5 or 6 different platforms. And that's great. It allows me to get a lot of stuff done, allows me to feel like I'm in a million different places at once. But it's also super detrimental to my own mental well-being and to the relationships that I have. I think we're all super addicted to our phones, and that's not necessarily a good thing. But unlike eating too much or eating unhealthily or smoking cigarettes or drinking and feeling really hungover, you don't necessarily feel the negative downsides in such a pronounced way. It's more of like a slow drip. And because it's a slow drip, people are less active in addressing it. And so, yeah, I think like if there's one thing that people could fix, it's just unplugging from your phone for like an hour or 2 a day could make a huge difference.
Have you done that?
I've started to.
What's that like?
My relationship with my significant other has gotten markedly better because I'm spending an hour or 2 a day where I'd otherwise be spending with her, like at least on the surface, I'd be spending with her, but I'd be checking my phone. I'd be not fully engaged in conversation. All the things that like, if you hear out loud, you're like, oh yeah, of course this person like feels ignored when I'm looking at my phone and like not directly answering her questions. Like if someone replays that back to you, it's quite obvious that the phone is like a third person in the conversation that you don't necessarily know is there. Yeah, but for me, I think like more productive conversations, enjoying the time that I do dedicate to spending with her at a higher level, my brain feels less foggy and I'm more like ready to dive back into things when it's time to do that rather than kind of like again the slow burn of always being on.
One of the things that I aim to achieve with this podcast is to show people that your presence alone is a gift.
Mm.
And I think we undervalue our own presence often and our attention towards something. And so with the guest, it's normally I'm directing the attention towards the guest
Yeah.
for an hour or more
Yeah.
and really giving them the gift of presence. I do that with myself as well, where I give myself the gift of looking at myself for an hour every day.
Yeah.
And just started doing that again. And I just notice how differently you value yourself, the words you say, and the things in your life when you are able to give presence as a gift for an hour or more or less. But just we don't think about it because our attention is so scattered in the modern world.
Were you always good at this?
No, not at all. And it's something that I got good at and then stopped being good at and now trying to get good at it again.
Why did you stop being good at it?
Because quote unquote life gets in the way.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's easy to trivialize, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. I already mastered that, or I already got better than most people, quote unquote. But it is remarkable how differently I'm operating when I'm giving myself the gift of attention. And so you bring that up of being like an hour a day without your phone. What do you do to make sure that you don't look at your phone? Are there any practices in place?
Yeah. I mean, I flip it over one, so I'm not whiplashing to notifications whenever anything pops up on my screen.
Yeah.
I generally try to get out of the house too during that period, just so it's not like right over my shoulder. I'm looking at my phone. Like it sounds like almost like an addiction, but for
It
a lot of
is.
people, it is, right?
Yeah.
So physically removing yourself from the temptation of checking it is probably the number one tip.
Mm.
And then number two is, yeah, I
I'll
think,
give you my number
yeah,
2,
yeah.
which is turning off all notifications on my
I
phone.
haven't done that.
Yeah,
I
it's
need to do
huge.
that. So I run a Shopify store,
Oh my
and
god.
I'm addicted.
Ding, ding,
I'm addicted.
ding.
Yeah, I wish it dinged a little bit more, but I'm addicted to seeing the Shopify notification come up.
Yeah.
And that's something where hopefully in the next couple of months that becomes too much, and I can just turn that off and trust that the money is coming in.
How many orders a day we doing?
So we're a subscription business. So every night at 12:16, I have the bad habit of now staying up for the daily reoccurring orders. So about anywhere from 50 to 75 orders will come in right at 12:16 a.m. every day, and then we'll generally end the day at like 150 to 200 orders.
Oh my god, I'm gonna start texting you at 12:17.
Yeah, how'd it go?
Exactly. Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time. I like to end these podcasts with challenges for people and to ask the guest a challenge for something we've covered in this episode or something maybe we haven't covered.
Yeah.
What's a challenge that comes to mind based on this conversation?
Yeah. So I knew you were going to ask this question. I also do my research, and I thought about it. It's actually the conversation we just had. It's around basically unplugging from your phone for 1 to 2 hours a day, especially if you're someone that believes that their livelihood relies on being plugged to their phone. I think we're both very online. We have constant feedback. We can probably benefit the most from this challenge of like, hey, put your phone down for 1 to 2 hours a day, maybe from 4 to 7 p.m. at night. Go for a walk with your significant other, or if you don't have a significant other, with a friend, with a colleague, by yourself, and just unplug from your phone for 1 to 2 hours a day. Come back, check it, right? Like see everything that you missed in the last 1 to 2 hours, and then almost mentally note that, okay, I didn't see those things for the last 1 to 2 hours, and I am no worse off for it, right? I am in the exact same place that I'd probably otherwise be than if I was frantically checking my phone for each piece of information that's being pinged at me. So yeah, just 1 to 2 hours a day. If you fail some days, that's fine. But I think each day that you're able to do that is better than each day that you're not able to do it.
I love that so much. Retweet. Where can we send people to connect with you and your brand
Yeah.
for more?
Yeah. The brand is trycreate.co. And then you can find me on Twitter at DAMCCORMICK13, DA McCormick 13. And then read Not Boring. So I mentioned Packy publishes on Monday. I publish on Fridays in the Weekly Dose of Optimism. And we can go from there.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate this.
Thank you.